From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Move It Maker announces new critical vulnerability on a different file transfer tool. Chinese email thefts from the U.S. State Department put Microsoft's status in question, and Johnson Controls faces huge ransomware demand. But do the thieves take on too much? These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some inside opinion and expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Andrew Storms, the VP of Security at Replicated. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Rich. I was glad to have the opportunity and invite this week. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, we got a ton of interesting stuff to dig into. Before we do, though, have to give a quick thank you to our sponsor, App Omni. CASBs can't protect your SaaS estate. Gain unified risk visibility with SSPM. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. To do so, go to CISOseries.com, hit the events dropdown, and look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. It's the third one down. Be sure to join us and contribute your comments in the chat. We've already got some conversations going. We got James, we got Sean, we got David in there. It's going to be a fun time. If you are in there, if you are watching this, why don't you share your favorite secondary color? I would love to know. Spoiler, I can't remember what secondary colors are. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's get started. First up here, Move It Maker announces a new critical vulnerability on a different file transfer tool. Bad news for Progress Software and its clients with the news late yesterday of another critical vulnerability affecting a different file transfer tool made by them. This time, it's the WSFTP server that has 8 vulnerabilities that need to be patched immediately. The issues all have CVE numbers, as one would expect. 2 of them have the severity scores of 9.9 and 10, which are, if you will note, the 2 highest. The company states that all versions of WS and WSFTP server are affected by these vulnerabilities, and that they have made all version-specific hotfixes available. Andrew, clearly the last thing that Progress needs or wants right now, and also the last thing its customers need, having watched and been through the Move It crisis, which, I mean, it's still very much ongoing at this point. I'm curious, what are your thoughts or recommendations for people who are currently relying on the software other than just getting the hot fixes?
Yeah, can we say flies to honey? I feel a little. I'm a fairly empathetic CISO type, where I do feel bad for them at this point. What's going on? It just continues to kind of steamroll and take them on that not nice path, if you would. I'll also say that you mentioned it in the lead-in, which is the scores on these things are not small. 1 being 10, which is the highest you can get. I did a little research and I looked at like recent 10s in the CVE database, 1 in the last couple months. So again, feeling sorry for them. I also looked at these vulnerabilities. It's a charcuterie board of sorts. I mean, you've got things like deserialization, you've got directory traversals, cross-site scripting. I had to write these down. That's why I'm reading from the screen. It just goes on and on. Like I said, I do feel really bad for them. And your question is, what to do at this point in time. I'm certain that some of their customers, and I don't really recommend this offhand, they're probably looking for new vendors at this point in time. Not an endorsement to move away, but certainly I think that's the truth of the matter, what's going on today. But operationally, like, what can they do besides patch? Obviously, patch is number one. One of the standard things we tell people, encrypt your data, right? Even if you were slammed by ransomware, at least the data is encrypted with your key and really has no value to the attackers. Difficulty with doing something like that is managing keys. It has operational overhead. And oh boy, make sure your key is not stored with the data somewhere where those attackers can just get it just as easily as you. So there's not a whole lot you can do. Patch, encrypt data, and hope that in the future you're going to pick a vulnerability or a vendor that doesn't get hit with such just bad after bad after bad. Like I said, I feel really sorry for what they're going through right now.
Well, and I appreciate you saying, kind of the security theater of we're going to take our ball and go to somewhere else and probably do so in a way that is less than ideal, less than secure, and might have knock-on effects of their own. Sure, that could be a long, a medium to long-term plan, but not something you can just kind of, shift over to overnight without all sorts of repercussions too, right?
Right, right. There's work to be done, and there's work to be done to kind of on the IT side. You have to do some planning. You got to
Oh
figure
yeah.
out what's the next vendor. You got to vet some new vendors. And you look at the list of people that are companies that were affected. They're not small. They're not small organizations that can just turn on a dime. So they're probably locked in for a little while, and their internal processes are going to take some time to maybe switch vendors or react in some way, like I said, encrypting data, things like that. So this is going to continue for a little while longer, I suspect. Yeah.
All right, well, next up here, Chinese hackers stole emails from the U.S. State Department in that Microsoft breach. A Senate staffer who works for Senator Eric Schmidt has told Reuters that Chinese hackers who breached Microsoft's email platform earlier this year stole 60,000 emails from 10 U.S. State Department accounts, 9 belonging to officials who were working in East Asia and on Pacific issues, and 1 belonging to a Europe focused official. Senator Eric Schmidt has since said we need to take a hard look at the federal government's reliance on a single vendor as a potential weak point. So, Andrew, many of our stories today are dealing with fallout from theft of PII or material like emails that could be maybe swept under the rug as not vital or important, only to find that that data is used for spear phishing, social engineering, whether it be by a government or a huge Las Vegas hotel chain or two.
Mhm.
Perhaps the buried lead here is the question of Microsoft as the sole vendor and the plausibility of opening things to other vendors. Do you see that as a good idea or a recipe for chaos? Definitely, I feel like kind of a similar discussion to what we're just having, right?
Right. I actually love the buried lead part of this, which is again, like anybody can get breached, and that's going to happen. And if you look at all of the email in the world, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if you put Microsoft and you put Google together, they probably have more than half the world's email at any one time.
That seems reasonable just based on what we know of
Right.
their scale, right? Yeah.
You're right, right. And so y- this is actually more of a kind of a risk management question in a way. And you have to kind of determine, like, do I want to go through a diverse kind of infrastructure? Do I want to be heterogeneous? Do I want to be homogeneous? And what does it take to get there? But more importantly, what is the cost to do so?
Hmm.
It's going to cost more in the IT world to have a diverse infrastructure. And so, do I want to invest in that today in order to hope that later, sometime in the future, that my risk will be reduced because I did invest in diversification on the upfront? Um, we saw this early on when people started moving from bare metal hardware to like VMware, for example. And I, for one, was managing infrastructure at the time. And we said, okay, let's go VMware for everything except we picked one of each kind of service and said we're still going to keep bare metal for each one of these different kinds of services, such that, heaven forbid, VMware got attacked or our SAN controllers went down, that we would still have on the side something we could still use. We might have to limp along, but at least we weren't seeing a complete outage. And you're right, it is the buried lead of, do I want to throw all my eggs into the one basket, or should I be thinking ahead and diversify over time, right? It's a tough decision, like I said, it costs money to do so, but is that money worth the risk or potential reduced risk over time?
Yeah, something I think every business is probably, reviewing those calculations. Certainly, may not change the determination, but probably more focus on that as of late. It seems like, at least.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, next up here, Johnson Controls faces a $51 million ransomware demand. The multinational that secures industrial control systems is now the latest victim of a cyber attack that shut down parts of its IT systems and encrypted data. According to Bitdefender, the Dark Angels ransomware group has claimed responsibility for the attack and claims to have exfiltrated over 25 terabytes of data from the company, which, at last I checked, is a lot. If the ransom is not paid, they threaten to publish the data on its leak site. But Graham Cluley suggests these bad guys may have bitten off more than they can chew, since many of Johnson Controls' customers use their technology to secure state and federal buildings as well as critical infrastructure. This means the attack and potential exfiltration and publication of highly sensitive data could be considered a risk to national security, with a lot of implications there. Andrew, this is an interesting twist, kind of, pulling a tiger's tail in this situation. Do you think Graham's suggestion might influence other threat actors, or at least become a more of a consideration?
I think somebody might be saying, "Uh oh, what did we do?"
Yeah.
He brought up a really great point, though, which is, and I come from a perspective of I had about 5 or 6 years of working in research with Department of Energy, so I have a kind of a sense of the OT world and how they do operate, right? And for them, they
Mhm.
really do treat that information as gold, whereas kind of like more in their private sector, it's not so big of a deal for you to know that I run EKS and it's in this zone, and, in Amazon. Whereas if you got the information of where my security operations center is running for my electrical utility, that's really prized information. And so I will also say that pretty much every utility that I got to meet during that time all had FBI on speed dial. So I'm going to guess FBI already knows. And we already know the FBI has already come out and said very publicly their advice is do not pay ransomware uh, on these kinds of things. And so I'm sure the Dark Angels are going to get their notoriety, and I do give them the thumbs up. You did pull off something pretty crazy big. Don't come after me, right? But I honestly don't think they're going to get the money, but they are going to get the notoriety for what they did, and it might be years from now, but before we see perhaps one of them caught and put in jail. We may not know the whole details until that happens, but I think Graham might have hit the right kind of point on that one. They may not be seeing that money. They might be doing the oh, what did we do? This
Yeah.
might not have been the good best choice. Yeah,
Not exactly perhaps some low hanging fruit they were hoping
yeah,
for.
yeah.
All right. Well, before we move on to our next story, we have to spend a few moments and talk about our sponsor for today, App Omni. Are you confident in your organization's SaaS security? App Omni surveyed 600 plus security practitioners globally, and 71% answered yes, but 79% experienced SaaS cybersecurity incidents. What's behind this disconnect? CISOs believe they have a mature level of SaaS cybersecurity using CASB, MFA, and IDP, but these solutions lack unified risk visibility. Without SSPM, they're blind to the true extent of their SaaS attack surface risk. Don't gamble with your data. Get the visibility and insights you need to protect your SaaS environment with App Omni. Details about the scattered spider emerge. Group behind the recent attacks on Caesars and MGM Grand Hotel chains is being described by Palo Alto Networks as sophisticated and organized, and who use social engineering techniques to pose as employees who have lost their login details and worm their way in through the help desk. That's certainly been the profile on the casino attacks. They're also skilled at bypassing MFA. Kevin Mandia, founder of Mandiant, great name there, points out that they are also ruthless, overwhelming security teams, leaving threatening messages and even swatting the homes of executives of the targeted companies. It's believed that the key players in this group are pretty young, Andrew, 17 to 22, very organized, and as described, ruthless. Swatting certainly falls into there. Not only is swatting traumatic, it's also just plain dangerous, and crosses that line between the business of tech and violence on your doorstep in ways that we don't see a lot of times in other cyber attacks. I'm curious, do you worry that there will be copycats in the cybercrime population, considering, I mean, if they see success, everybody loves to copycat off that.
Yeah. Let me first say, yet another group. Please don't come after me. Right. Uh, I mean, the idea of swatting is not new, but it is absolutely terrifying. Um, there's a book. I'm not endorsing. I don't get any money back from this, but there's a book called The Daemon. It was by Daniel Suarez. It came out maybe 10 years ago or so. And
Hmm.
the basic concept was that not an AI kind of thing, but some kind of autonomous bit of code creates a virtual world, and everybody joins this world, and it rewards people in the virtual world for doing pretty heinous bad things in the physical world. Um, and the point I'm making is when you see that border or the wall get crossed where the digital world is suddenly affecting you in that physical world, that's when people actually have a much more emotional kind of response to it. Whether that's stealing money, sending people to your house to swat you, I mean that's a big deal. Like Brian Krebs, who fairly well known journalist, right? He was swatted a number of years ago, and he told his story, and I had opportunity to meet him in person. He told me as well, and it's scary, like what comes out there. And this is the thing nobody really wants to mess with. And I could see why you would probably or potentially take that step not only to gain notoriety, but potentially protect yourselves. Because if you come out fighting right out of the corner, as they say in boxing, right, you might have a better chance of survival through this world. And yeah, I don't want to mess with these folks either. So um, I'm not going to poke the bear,
Mm-mm.
right?
Well, I mean, but it definitely speaks to when we talk about social engineering. A lot of times, it's okay. This is a way to get around security controls or something like that. Kind of, you know, it, we see it as a complement to phishing, or more recently, we've seen it over phones. But kind of using that social engineering to then enact like a physical, real world interaction, something that can be very dangerous is something that I think a lot of people aren't prepared for. I mean, I remember a few years ago hearing threat actors, that were calling victims or calling like customers of
Mhm.
victims or something like that, and feeling like that would feel so, like so much like emotional blackmail, or like there
Yeah,
would be a lot more emotion tied up to that. Like, oh, you got your 9,000th phishing email of the day. Who cares? Put it in spam. So
right.
like just in terms of always finding ways to take these same tools that we've seen out there for forever and apply them to kind of ramp up continually, just ramp up the pressure. It is devious, it's ruthless, but it's again, it's all about trying to increase that chance of payout.
It's effective
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Right. Doxing people is
yeah.
also fairly effective at the same time, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think we're going to continue to see that crossover between the digital and the physical world because we are so interlinked between the two. But like you said, the physical thing is what usually turns out to be the most emotional fallout and the most emotional pain from that. And certainly swatting, it could actually lead to physical harm as well. Somebody could accidentally, be physically hurt in when someone's house is swatted. It,
Yeah.
it, it's not a good thing. Yeah,
It yeah, it can get pretty nasty.
yeah.
Next here, Kia and Hyundai exploit linked to massive car thefts. Again, talking about more kind of real world or physical implications of security here. In January 2022, thieves stole 85 Kia and Hyundai vehicles in Chicago. By the autumn of that year, over 1,400 vehicles were stolen in a month. Thefts like these are happening in many major cities because over 9 million vehicles from these brands were shipped to the US without an engine immobilizer, something required in other countries and other blocks, allowing anyone with a simple USB connection to a phone to hotwire a car. Kia and Hyundai released software updates to add an ignition kill feature to prevent thefts. But roughly 2 million of these vehicles cannot receive that update at all. And then in July, Carfax reported 5 million vehicles either didn't receive or weren't eligible for the update, at least at that point. So half or more than so. Every week, it seems like we have a story that, just I have to look over my metaphorical glasses and give the look, Andrew. Do you think this is simply I don't know, a supply chain issue, or, should this be speaking to import regulations or just bad planning for what's possible?
Or all of the above.
Yeah, all the above. Yeah.
Like, right. I will say I've watched some of these videos. I think they're called the Kia Boys kind of
Yeah.
subculture kind of thing. It's actually quite easy to steal one of these cars. I was surprised, and I could see why this could turn into a trend when it's that easy and you feel like there's no immobilizer, maybe there's no way to track you. Then yeah, a joyride for an evening seems to be something people would probably latch onto. I feel bad, but um, the flip side of it is, I think one reason may have come down to cost. For example, I saw one person quote that the device is $100,
Hmm.
um, which isn't bad. But then I also saw an article quoting saying 9 million vehicles were potentially at risk because they didn't have the immobilizers. Well, that's $100 pop times 9 million cars. That's no small amount of money, right?
Hmm.
That's just the device. There could also be installation, programming fees, and so forth. So maybe somewhere somebody in Kia said, I'm going to save us some money and choose not to install them. It's quite very well could be the case. I think you also brought up the other great point, which is this could be just a simple supply chain problem. We certainly know this since the COVID era that supply chains are really tightly interconnected to ways we never knew.
Hmm.
And they could have just had a hard time finding the devices and getting them installed. Again, this is one of those tough ones, right? I'm not so sure the answer is very straight, but I will say that if your car is being so, if your car manufacturing, your car is so targeted for theft, you would think it would behoove you to do something about that, whether that's to install the immobilizers, design a different car, make it harder to steal. Because at the end of the day, it's going to hurt their PR. They're going to, and will probably reduce the amount of cars they sell. So we're still waiting to see more on this one as well.
Yeah, there's going to be. I'm interested to see because I'm sure a lot of these cities have a lot of things that they want to say. The impacts. I can imagine to policing when you're seeing
Hmm.
triple 4-digit percent increases in car thefts, accounting for a majority. Like all the knock-on effects that go on with that, and that these are lower in, these are less expensive cars, people that can probably least afford to have a car stolen, stuff like that, or be the most impacted by it. Just some nasty stuff. So this is obviously this story, isn't new. We're talking about January 2022, but this was the first kind of centralized reporting I've seen of
Right.
the impact of that. So I
Yeah.
definitely want to make sure we address that.
I think that was the most interesting point, though, is that we did have now some hard data from different cities. And to your point, just the cost for policing, for example, is probably skyrocketed because of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, through no fault of the cities, it just hey, turns out information spreads pretty quickly about when you just need a USB drive
Right.
to steal a car.
Right.
All right, and our last story here, H&R Block, Google, and Meta face RICO class action data privacy lawsuits. This case alleges that the tax preparation firm H&R Block worked with Meta and Google to embed spyware on its website to make money from scraped tax return data. The suit alleges that this should be considered a pattern of racketeering on a massive scale, which is why it's being filed under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. But if you've heard of that, it's usually applied to organized crime cases. A statement from Google confirms that its strict policies around collection of data and has noted that site owners, as opposed to Google, control what information they collect. So, Andrew, it's a little bizarre to consider the RICO Act being brought up in the tech sector, especially in this regard. But is this just the work of ambitious class action lawyers, or do you think this case has merit?
I'm going to go on a limb and say there's merit here. Um, I think it was 20 or 2021. You might recall there was a case. Bulletproof Hosting was the company. They pled guilty to a RICO case. Actually, they were. I'm going to paraphrase and perhaps maybe a little bit incorrect, but generally they were a web hosting service that catered to kind of multinational criminal persons, right?
Mhm.
And I think the RICO thing was probably very appropriate for what was going on. So it's not the first for tech. It's one of the few, at least that I can think of in recent history. Um, the data economy is no joke, is what we're coming down to. And companies have for years have been collecting gobs of data, not necessarily having any sense of what they're going to do with it. And in this case, I found interesting for a couple of reasons, but one is I felt like they intentionally are pushing the boundaries to see how far they can get without getting into that red zone of against the law kind of thing. And you read the articles and they actually talk about how H&R Block realized that they needed to quote unquote kind of anonymize or sanitize the data. So they had a sense of what they were doing was potentially not right because they
Mhm.
knew they had to anonymize it in some way. And so for me, when you look at that, I'm like, yeah, I think RICO might be appropriate here in this case.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where for so long, we've had this mentality, to quote that famous economist story, data is the new oil, or it's a land grab, so more is always more. And I think increasingly, whether it's from regulatory pressure or it's from being targeted by threat actors, that this data also carries with it some risk consideration that I think is starting to be more appreciated now more than ever. And certainly cases like this where people were clearly knew they were, or seemed like they knew they were skirting the bounds of the law, is kind of pushing that to the end here.
Yeah.
We had a comment here from James Driscoll saying, "I get the feeling that people did not read any privacy policies that would have what information is collected and how it's used or who it is shared with," and that's fair. I would also say that uh, there is, I am sympathetic to that. Like those are written for lawyers, not for ordinary people. I know that meets their legal obligation, for sure. But I'm just saying, if you want to, I guess, if you want to create any goodwill, that is not necessarily the always my favorite defense, even though that might clear up some legal liability. I don't know how it will reflect in this case.
I think too that you're in a difficult spot because even if you read the privacy policy and you disagreed with it, your only recourse is just not to use the service.
Yeah.
And right. And so as an individual, you're in that hard spot. Like, do I want to use potentially a free tax preparation avenue, but free means I have to give up something, so it's not really free, or do I want to go pay like a CPA kind of scenario? And so for the individual consumer, buyer, whatever, taxpayer, they're in a difficult spot.
All right. Well, I also want to thank all of our James. Thank you so much for your comment here. I really appreciate it. We also got a great one in from David Cross saying, "Isn't the theme here consistently users not using MFA?" I would say maybe not just users, but I would also say organizations not consistently implementing it. But yes, MFA, all the things. It doesn't cure everything, but it certainly helps. And CCL came in also just right now saying exactly what Rich said. Thank you, CCL. Always good bonus points there. I can read them line by line, but not sure I will be able to understand all of the nitty gritty details. So yeah, definitely I feel that as well. We also had some great comments in from Sean. He was saying if Palo Alto says it was sophisticated, I actually believe it. Yeah, Palo Alto, I think they know some security stuff. I feel like they might kind of know the threat landscape out there. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for being on the show. Was there a story here that really stood out to you, made you roll your eyes or give a big thumbs up, just a favorite that you had today?
I'm really looking forward to this RICO case, actually. Yeah.
Getting all the details there. I will definitely be continuing to cover that because I feel like some interesting implications there for
and
sure.
It has long-term impact for privacy potential. Yeah.
Hey, that's always a plus if we get some clarity, one way or the other, some clarity.
Yeah.
And where can people find you, Andrew, if they are so inclined to follow you on the cyberspace?
Certainly, I'm on LinkedIn, Andrew Storms. I am on Twitter, or X now, used to be called Twitter. You'll find me there as Storms, as a matter of fact. Most people call me Storms, so that's how you'll find me. So yeah. Thank
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Andrew Storms, the VP of Security at Replicated. Truly appreciate all of your wisdom and great takes today. We'll definitely have to have you back on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks also to our sponsor, App Omni. CASBs can't protect your SaaS estate. Gain unified risk visibility with SSPM. Thanks to all of our commenters again today. We can't get all of them up on the screen, but we appreciate you. We see you, and we want to see you here next week. So make a promise to yourself, cross your heart, but I hope you live a long and happy, healthy life. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Week in Review show. And also next Friday, be sure to join us for Super Cyber Friday, where the topic will be hacking container security, an hour of critical thinking about how to shine a light into an image's black box. Definitely want to check that out. And if you want to, go to CISOseries.com to register. In the meantime, you can get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Where else? Every single day. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.